Hey, I'm Paeter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics, a big assortment this time, to talk about as a DC fan, and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about, so be aware this is your first and only warning that many spoilers lie ahead. Right now, we're taking a look at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on October 17th, 2023. From that group, oh my gosh, am I going to talk about all of them? It's a crazy amount. Some, I think, are titles that were delayed in their publishing schedule, and so DC's kind of playing catch-up. Others, I think it's just the result of it being a little bit bigger week than normal, and then on top of that, there's just a larger number than average number of comics that I particularly am interested in. I think we have about 10 here. I'm not going to be able to, I've got so much going on. I'm in the thick of fundraising for our annual Game Save event for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. So it's going to be kind of, unfortunately, a mile wide and inch deep. I am going to zoom in on two kind of like philosophical issues and spend a little time on that. But as far as talking about the stories and stuff and reacting from a more just a standard geek perspective, there will probably be significantly less of that. So I'm sorry about that. My time just won't allow me to spend more time. I'd love to dig in deep on all of these, but oh my gosh. Anyway, first up, Batman, Superman, World's Finest, number 19. This brings the story arc to a close that had Jax Ur from the animated series, the Superman animated series, brought into the DC Universe proper for the first time, as far as I know. He turns out to be the villain, and he's kind of been manipulating the Riddler up to this point, but the big reveal last issue is that he's the villain, and so they've got to stop him, and there's all kinds of Phantom Zone stuff going on. I wasn't really a fan of the writing, which felt pretty straightforward, overly simplistic, kind of expositional, and then the art style, the interior art style as well, just feels a little bit simplistic, maybe to kind of best suit the Jax Ur, nostalgia factor, or the design of his costume. I don't know, but I'll be ready for both the writing style, which I know Mark Waid writes this, he can do something very different. I'll be ready for him to move on to a different writing style, and for maybe the art to be done by someone else. I'm not really sure. I do want to zoom in on one moment in here where Superman is explaining who Jax Ur is to Batman. And he explains that in Krypton's history, Jax Ur defied the Council of Krypton, which kind of didn't want people to... They were nervous about intermingling with other species and stuff, but Jax Ur, in his research, created his own spaceship in defiance of the Council. He says it went off course almost immediately, destroying one of Krypton's populated moons. And he says that resulted in the loss of 10,000 lives for starters, but thanks to Jax Ur's actions, he said, the Science Council doubled down on their laws, banning all spacecraft, including my father's attempts to build rescue arcs once he discovered Krypton was about to explode. The way I see it, emphasis on I, they put that in bold. The way I see it, Superman says, Jax Ur was partially responsible for Krypton's total destruction, a tragedy that took the lives of billions, including my parents. That's why I'm struggling to tamp down my rage. I don't think I have any conclusive thoughts about this, but something about this doesn't quite work for me, because Jax Ur, he did something that had consequences that then led the Council, in response to those things, to make their own choices that ultimately doomed Krypton by preventing the arcs from being made. But Superman is saying, the way I see it, Jax Ur was partially responsible for Krypton's total destruction. Well, responsible in what sense? Like morally or mechanically responsible? Mechanically, maybe, but still, the results of his actions, the disaster that happened, he's responsible for those thousands of lives that his recklessness caused. But is he responsible for the deaths of all the others that were lost because the Council wouldn't allow Jor-El to create arcs for everybody to escape? I don't think he is morally responsible. That's my thinking right now. You can give me an alternate argument if you'd like. I'm very open to kind of exploring this. But it doesn't seem nearly as cut and dry as Superman seems to think it is, that he was partially responsible. Was he mechanically responsible? Well, maybe there's more of an argument there because he mechanically brought about some effects that then... But see, the council isn't a machine. They're not. It's not just cause and effect. They ultimately are beings that have free will and the ability to reason and then make choices. So I still put the decision to not have arcs at the feet of the council, their inability to have nuance in their thinking. That seems to me, squarely at the feet of the council and not on Jax-Ur. And so why am I making such a big deal out of this? I think it's because there's this tendency today, especially as we see online discourse, for people to be polarized in their thinking. If someone is not 100% in one camp, then they might as well be the villain in the other camp. And I see just a little bit of that kind of polarized thinking in Superman's reasoning here. He says, the way I see it, Jax-Ur was partially, admittedly he says partially, I want to acknowledge that, but even so, partially responsible for Krypton's total destruction. A tragedy that took billions of lives, including my parents. And as a result, he's not just feeling like, I don't know, he's not wrestling with this in terms of like he doesn't know morally how he feels about it. He's trying to keep his anger in check because he's already angry. He's already decided he's angry. That's why I'm struggling, he says, to tamp down my rage. His rage is a fact that he's dealing with, which says to me he's already decided on Jax-Ur's moral guilt, I feel like here. So, I don't know. I don't want to be overly nitpicky on this because there's all kinds of different reasons that the writer's going to choose to write this kind of moment. I think it creates this great sense of drama and a reason to see Jax-Ur as a major villain, as someone that we should be on board with wanting Superman to stop. So dramatically I see why they would go in this direction, but I'd like to have a chance to, if Superman were a real person, sit down and talk with him a little bit more about this. But anyway, there's some complexities there. Like I said, I'm not settled in my own feelings about, and my own thoughts, I should say more specifically, about this. But I don't think it's as simple as maybe Superman is portraying it in terms of, specifically, if he's talking about Jax-Ur's moral responsibility. All right, moving on, I want to mention Batman, Gargoyle of Gotham, #1. It's actually called Book 1. I didn't know that. I don't keep track of page count as easily when I'm using DC Universe Infinite. But man, what a smoking deal DC Universe Infinite was this week. Anyway, so this is part of DC's Black Label, which is really questionable whether or not the stories under the Black Label are part of DC continuity. That's kind of up to the long run to see how history treats it and stuff. But this story could easily fit into a sort of year one type of scenario because Jim Gordon still has his reddish brown hair, but the design of Batman's costume is clearly very different, and he's behaving in a pretty intense way. It reminds me of a Frank Miller interpretation of Batman, both in the writing and in the type of artists that would accompany Frank Miller's work on Batman in the past, with lots of detailed pencil work and inks and stuff. And I really like what I'm seeing. Batman's costume has been definitely redesigned. It's his eyes look in some way inspired by iterations of the mask we've seen before, where they're more narrow, more slanted, almost like slits that he's seeing through. It has a different look and arguably a more menacing look. But in general, I would say all the faces in this book are drawn in a way that makes them more striking, but not with any interest seemingly in them being like attractive necessarily. So it's a really distinct, interesting kind of vibe, and I like it. And Batman in this is much earlier in his career and much more extreme. He's ready to dispose of the Bruce Wayne identity altogether and fully give himself over to Batman. And we can see in his actions that he's also much more extreme, not killing people, but still doing, irreparable harm to them. So it's definitely a darker, edgier take on Batman, and I'm at the very least very interested, very engaged with the story so far, even if in the long run it's going to have no bearing on the mainstream DC Universe's continuity. Speaking of continuity, though, that is the only reason I read Catwoman 57 this month, because I'd lost interest in following this book on a monthly basis, but it is a major part of the Gotham War crossover. It's part 3 in that event, and we get into a little bit more of Vandal Savage having purchased Wayne Manor, and he and Batman have kind of they cross paths and butt heads over that, and so Batman's dealing with that and needing to get his house back. But mostly this is furthering the story of the major divide between Batman and Catwoman, each of them leading camps of a mix of vigilantes, and in the case of Catwoman, some villains as well. She is trying to create kind of a safe version of burglaring in Gotham City because all the criminal class that are trying to recover, trying to reform, are not getting the opportunities and don't have the education to really get jobs, to support themselves and their family and stuff. And so she sees this as a good way to help them by specifically robbing from the rich to give to the poor, namely give to themselves, although 10% they have to give to charity or something like that. So there's some interesting moral complexity thrown in there. But Batman is not going to have any of this because people are still being put in harm's way, and there's been at least one death so far. So it's an interesting kind of moral dilemma that is also very character-focused, as I mentioned last time when I talked about this story, because it splits the main cast of Gotham into 2 camps that are seeing this issue in 2 different ways. So really, nothing was standout about this issue. We're just kind of seeing Catwoman's relationship to characters like Jason Todd and Dick Grayson, getting into their history a little bit. And I'm finding myself more invested than I would have been in Catwoman and her relationships with these characters because of the near wedding that she and Bruce had a few years back. I consider her much more integral to who Batman is and to the Bat family because of that big story arc. So anyway, it was interesting in and of itself as part of the larger story, but the writing style, the storytelling here, it didn't do anything to say, oh, you should really give Catwoman another try, So, but enjoying it for now for the role it's playing in the Gotham War storyline. So again, that's Catwoman 57. The one other major kind of philosophical moment that I want to unpack a little bit came in Cyborg number 3, where in the last 2 issues, this was one that was delayed, so I had to remind myself what was going on in the last 2 issues. But Cyborg's father, Silas, or is that his Cyborg's name? I can't remember now, but his father, I think his name is Silas, is a scientist who had just really treated Victor is Cyborg, treated Victor really poorly, was just a really poor father to him. But he died in, I believe it was issue 1, and then in the reveal at the end of issue 1 is that he has come back, but as a machine. Like his memories, his behavioral patterns, all that has been apparently perfectly copied in software form, and now he continues to exist as this AI cybernetic character. And so there was a big question in the first 2 issues as Victor's musing in his mind about the nature of the soul. Does such a thing exist, and what happens to us after we die? Of course, Victor lost his mother, and so that's certainly going to be weighing on him and a major part of his character and the things that he's wrestling with. Well, it looked like in the first 1 or 2 issues that they were going to be maybe wrestling with the issue of a soul, representing the reality of the soul. Now I'm not quite sure what the writer's view is. It seems to me that Victor is settling on the idea that there is no such thing as a soul, and that something that like software that perfectly copies the behavioral patterns and represents the memories and things like that of a human being who has died, that human still lives on. It's really confusing. Let's dig into it a little bit. In a flashback sequence, we see a scientist that comes to Silas and wants him to work with him on this project. And he goes into more detail in his office saying, what I told you, out there at this party that they were at was just the commercial phase. Here's the real deal. He shows him this little device he's got in his hand, like a cell phone or something like that, and says, this is my living code. Everything that makes me, broken down to its base elements in real time. And he says, phase 2 of his whole plan here is about eternal life through what I call organic mechanics. With a user's living code, we can download that data into one of my synths when they die. In other words, and then both characters say at the same time, we could live forever. And immediately I wanted to say, no, you can't live. They're saying we as two centers of consciousness. Silas saying to himself, I could live forever. And this other character, I think his name is maybe Marcus, says, I could live forever. We could live forever. No, you can't live forever, even on a naturalistic worldview. If you completely copied yourself, he just said, he held in his hand, this is my living code. And so it is a separate entity from him. So what they should have said in this moment is, these copies of us can live forever. That they will not experience living forever by this means. And yet that is what they are presenting to each other. I don't understand why they're missing that. I don't understand where the writer is coming from, because it seems pretty clear to me that they're not talking about themselves. They're talking about these copies of themselves, which are distinct from them. Marcus said a moment before, I'm going to call him Marcus, I can't remember if that's his name or not. He says, with a user's living code, we can download that data into one of my synths when they die. Okay, well, what if you were to download that data into one of your synths before they die? Then you're going to have, undeniably, two copies, two individuals, if you're going to call this synth an individual. Now, will it be up to date because the other person is still living? No, it won't be up to date. But will it be any less of a being or a person on your view? On your view that you're presenting here, no, it will still be a person. It'll just be diverged at that point from the memories and experiences of the original. Because the idea here is that this thing that he's holding in his hand is constantly being updated through an interface. He's wearing an earbud that's constantly updating it with his ongoing thoughts and memories. So there's not a split yet. It's constantly being updated until he dies, But even so, these are two, if we grant, and I don't grant that this could be a person, but if we grant that this digital copy could be a person, at the very least, there needs to be an acknowledgement that it is distinct from the copy it is being made from. This is not a path to eternal life. On top of that, we realize that the dialogue kind of, there's been a narration voiceover, if you will, a narration box going through all this, and we don't know exactly who the person is. We think maybe, is it Silas, is it Marcus and stuff, and then we realize that it's the AI copy of, let's see, was it Marcus or was it Silas? I can't remember. Yes, Silas. It's the AI copy of Silas that survived Silas's death, and Silas picked up this earbud, put it in his ear, and that began the creation of this distinct copy of Silas. And the AI of that moment says, in an instant, I felt like I was in two places at once. Silas was in the outside world while I was inside Solas's server. Solas is like the company or whatever. I was connected to his thoughts and feelings on the outside, but I had my own thoughts and feelings as well. It was disorienting. So even in the writing itself, in the concept of this, the AI character acknowledges itself as distinct from the original, and yet Silas was under the delusion that he in some way would experience immortality, unless in some sense he means his essence, like talking about water. Like when one instance of water evaporates or completely disintegrates or whatever, there are still instances of water all over the world. And so in that sense, you could say water lives forever. But I mean, is that really what is meant here? Is that really the hope? Is that something that would give them a sense of living forever? Not in any sense that we typically mean living forever and finding that as a desirable thing to obtain. No, when we talk about wanting to live beyond this life, we talk about our center of consciousness continuing. So yeah, it's interesting that I relate to this statement here. It was disorienting because I'm disoriented in terms of what is the view actually being presented here about the nature of personhood. Are we, as the reader, meant to agree with Silas and Marcus when they say, we could live forever? Or are we, as the reader, meant to say, no, not actually. You guys are distinct from these things, these software AI things that you're creating? Well, it at least seems as though Victor has made up his mind. What's unclear to me is if we're going to follow him on a journey of concluding one thing for now and then coming to a different conclusion later on. If memory serves, there was a mini-series with Cyborg that I read where something similar was done. An AI version of his mom was kind of brought back from the dead, and I believe that story arc ended with him kind of realizing, this isn't really my mom. So I'm wondering if a similar journey is going to be embarked on by Victor with his dad. But at the very least, right now, in his interaction with the AI version of his dad's memories and stuff, he tells him, all right, then, just be careful as they're splitting off to go do their plans to beat the bat or whatever. All right, then, just be careful, Dad. There's kind of an ellipsis and then a new panel, and then he says, Dad. So there's this moment where he hesitates, and then he says, Dad. I'm going to call this my dad. This is my dad. So I'm not sure. Is this supposed to be a cathartic moment where we're supposed to say, oh, it is his dad, and we're supposed to agree with Victor right now? Or are we just kind of witnessing his journey and still meant to have the jury out in our own minds? I don't know. I don't know. So either we're going to be taken on a journey that will have some really interesting nuance philosophically regarding this issue, or I feel like the writer themselves is inconsistent and maybe confused and hasn't thought this out completely. I don't know. I hope the former, but the latter wouldn't surprise me, not being at all familiar with this writer. So anyway, I have to say there are things about the story that are not interesting to me, and normally it's the very rare bird of a comic book that would have me wanting to continue reading it on a purely philosophical level. But I'm just interested, not so much, I'm not assuming that this book is going to be able to say something that hasn't been said with more nuance and thought in actual sources that are focused on, like nonfiction, in other words. I think nonfiction is so much more equipped to explore this issue than fiction. You're very, very limited in how you can explore this in fiction. So it's not that I'm expecting that this is going to be a resource that's going to present to me a new idea and compelling new thought on this topic, based on the other places that I've gone in nonfiction to actually explore this. But I guess it's just real curiosity, like how is the story and the writer going to handle this issue? Where are they going to land at the end of the day? And by possible implication, what are they kind of wanting to say to us and maybe persuade us to adopt in terms of worldview on this issue as this story arc plays out? So I'm very interested in where Cyborg is going to go. I think once this philosophical issue is resolved, I don't know that the story and the characters are going to be enough to pull me in. They're going to have to exercise a very different muscle at that point to keep me pulled in. But philosophically, I'm very interested where this is going to end up. But that's all my thoughts for now on Cyborg number 3. Green Lantern War Journal number 1 features John Stewart and what looks to be the beginning of something that could really appeal to me. It's got some kind of aliens or entities from another world that seem to have a connection to the Star Sapphire rings and that energy, but they've got like a monster horror, like almost kind of this is going to sound ridiculous, but it's like a space zombie vibe, or maybe more of a space lich would be a more threatening and less humorous way to describe it. And it doesn't give me humorous vibes at all. In fact, I wonder if it's some combination of Star Sapphire and Black Lantern or something, because it looks clearly undead. So I like horror now and then for sure, and I certainly, more than that, even like serious superhero stories, and it looks like we're going to get that here, not just because of the very dark and menacing threat, but also because of a sweet moment later on in the issue. John Stewart, who I had to look up the Wikipedia to remind me, even though I'd read the story, I'd forgotten about how this happened and what was going on. I think it's because the story was very interesting to me. But John has internalized the power of the Green Lantern ring, where his heart itself is like his own Green Lantern battery, and so he's enormously powerful in ways that other Green Lanterns are not. In fact, whether or not he actually is a Green Green Lantern is questionable at this point, but he still has the power. Anyway, he's just going back to his roots, living at home with his aging mother, and you don't really notice anything all that unusual with her. Maybe you notice that she's a little bit forgetful, but it becomes clear eventually that she has some form of dementia or perhaps Alzheimer's, and to the point where she has forgotten that John's younger sister died a number of years ago. And John, in caring for his ailing mother, just can't bring himself to tell her that she's actually passed away, probably because he's had to tell her that multiple times and seen her break down over and over again upon hearing that news, or maybe some other just really difficult experience with her telling her that news. And so he's gotten into this habit where it seems like he's trying to break out of, but at the end he's just like, forget it. I guess one more time. But he keeps creating a construct of his departed sister that can just go along with the delusion that his mother is living in. And there's just a sweetness and a sadness to it that I'm just like, man, if they can give me creepy space horror and then some really bittersweet, down-to-earth family drama, along with potentially cosmic level, superpowered adventures, then I could really be on board. I'm already a big Green Lantern fan. It's long been my favorite superhero concept, even though it's not always my favorite book. But man, War Journal, Green Lantern War Journal, featuring John Stewart as the main character, could surprise me and become my favorite Green Lantern book. I don't know. We'll see. I've always been interested in John Stewart. I've long thought that he should stand out from other Green Lanterns, going all the way back to Green Lantern Mosaic, when he absorbed his power ring and we learned that he was actually kind of a hybrid Guardian. Well, that series didn't sell well, and so editorial just swept that under the rug and it was almost never mentioned again. But I always thought, what happened to that? He had Guardian powers. What happened? Well, it looks like maybe in a roundabout way they're trying to make him powerful again, but without expecting readers to go all the way back to Mosaic from the early 90s, was it, or something like that. So anyway, but I've always wanted John Stewart to stand out. I think that he could be so much more, and has been for a number of years, so much more than just kind of like the Black Green Lantern. And they've tried differentiating him in terms of his personality and his background and stuff in other ways that I've appreciated. But I do, at the end of the day, want him to have a different power set for some reason, and a slightly different power set. And so this could be just the ticket to finally give me maybe the all-round John Stewart that I've kind of wanted to see, and give him the respect that he deserves, even though ever since, of course, the animated series, he's been getting plenty of respect. So anyway, that's all I have to say about it's not called John Stewart. Green Lantern War Journal, #1. Okay, I gotta try and move faster here. Nightwing 106, I'm finding it interesting so far. The art style is not my favorite, but the book so far looks like it's focusing on Nightwing with kind of like the woman in the chair being Barbara Gordon, who's back in her Oracle role, but seemingly is willing to put on the Batgirl suit, when the situation calls for it. I think that's kind of a cool balance, because I do like her as Oracle, but after really liking Gail Simone's Batgirl, would like her to be able to be Batgirl too. So it seems like best of both worlds. Anyway, in this support role for Nightwing, I think it's perfect because they have this past romance. I think they are for each other, their most long-lasting romantic interest in the comics. I'm trying to remember if there was if Donna Troy maybe was longer for Dick, but I can't remember. Anyway, so that past romantic tension, I can't remember if they're currently dating or not, but there's just nice character interplay there. And so I hope they'll continue to lean into that, because character stuff is really important to me in comics. But also we're digging into Nightwing's past during the time that he lost his memory, got shot in the head, and took on the persona of Rick for a good while. Well, apparently something was given to him during that time, but he wasn't ready to accept it because he knew he wasn't in his right mind. So he had it set aside, some mysterious book in this vault. And now as Nightwing, he was approached by the owner of the vault, like, hey, we've got something here for you. I was told to keep it until you became Nightwing again. And so, but he goes to claim it and the vault is gone. And so there's this kind of unfolding mystery and adventure that I think could be interesting. Mainly, I'm interested in what the mystery is and him and Barbara and their ongoing relationship. It looks like they're going to go with kind of a pirate motif, because the vault has an association with kind of a modern pirate ship, and I'm not really into pirates at all. So if anything, that's a shortcoming for my interests. But the rest of it, I think, has me for now. That's Nightwing 106. Then we've got Superman number 6, part of a new story arc called The Chained, Part 1. We've still got Lex Luthor, who was in prison, interacting with Superman kind of like via, like not an earbud, like, does he have an ear? I think Superman was wearing an earbud, but they were able to kind of communicate to each other. Again, kind of like the Barbara and Dick situation, having the man in the chair, except he's in prison. Lex Luthor being the man in the chair for Superman. What a great concept. But Lex Luthor was shanked in prison, and so he was in critical condition. While Superman was trying to resolve that situation, he discovered there's this vault underneath Supercorp, as it's called now, Lex Luthor's old company, given over to Superman. And there was this high-tech prison cell that was created for one occupant, but that occupant is a mystery. So anyway, Superman goes down there to check it out and lets loose this unknown threat we've never seen before, not a villain or a character that I recognize from the past in DC Comics, who has immense powers and is now on the loose with a vendetta against Lex Luthor, since he knows Lex Luthor cares about Metropolis and wants to be like the shining hero of Metropolis. He's like, okay, Metropolis needs to go. So he's going to go let out his anger on Metropolis and then get around to Lex Luthor eventually. And of course, Superman has to put a stop to that. And that's kind of where we leave this issue. But the interplay between Superman and Lex Luthor takes on a different form that I thought was really funny. Although Lex Luthor is, unconscious in critical condition, Mercy suggests that Superman interact with this basically AI copy version of Lex that's called, like, I guess what it was, like a LL-01. He's like, oh boy. So I guess he's had some interaction with this before. I'm not familiar with this thing, or at least I don't remember it. But it's clearly inspired by Jor-El, who I suppose at this point, we could assume that Lex Luthor has had some experience interacting with a hologram of Jor-El. And so he's like, good day, Kal-El, how can I be of service? And Superman says, help me this, blah, 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 whatever, this is what I need. And he responds, gladly, my son. And I'm just like, oh my God. How presumptuous, and like exactly what Lex Luthor would do to try and put some version of himself in a fatherly position over Superman. So anyway, even with Lex Luthor being unconscious, this interplay between these two characters, the way they're butting heads and rubbing each other the wrong way at every opportunity, still a major feature of this book, and why I am going to continue, I think, to be interested in Superman. I don't have much to say about the Vigil number 5, sadly. Mainly because I'm short on time anyway. But at the end of the book, instead of saying to be continued, it says to be concluded, which leads me to believe that here at number 5, this is a series that was meant to go the long haul, but like a number of books that are kind of tried out for 6 months and then canceled if they don't perform, it looks like the Vigil is probably going to end with its 6th issue, which is a bummer to me because we finally get a reveal of the backstory for the scientist that's the guy that's kind of in charge of the Vigil, and the origin of all the members of the Vigil and how he says he kind of dreamed them up. And what's crazy, the reveal in this issue is that he actually did dream them up, literally. He was part of the Philadelphia experiment in 1940 whatever, and went into another dimension where thoughts could be made reality, long story short anyway. He and 2 other scientists went to this place. The woman scientist that he was with, they kind of developed a romantic relationship, and their efforts were focused on getting out of this weird dimension, but the other one was just obsessed with kind of gaining power and manipulating the world. And so he used his power while he was in this realm that would create reality in response to his thoughts, And there's limitations to how he could do that I'm not going to get into. But if you overreach and try to create too many crazy changes, then whatever world you try to create will just collapse on itself. It won't remain permanent. But if you make subtle changes, and I guess subtle changes in the existing universe instead of creating your own, they are more likely to remain permanent and can become stable. And so knowing that this evil scientist was going to be manipulating the world to his own ends, the main scientist that's the leader of the Vigil, he, before leaving this dimension, dreamed up these members of the Vigil. And then when he came out of it, he made it his mission to gather them together to help him combat the evil scientist that is manipulating the world, also very subtly, but bringing about advances in technology that could be harmful to the world and bring about his, there's a word there, you know what it is, I'll let you look it up, ends. And so that's why the Vigil, from the beginning, has been purposed to find truths and technologies existing in the world that are just too dangerous for humanity and basically erase them from existence so no one can get their hands on them. It ultimately ties back to this evil scientist that is in this other dimension or whatever. So what a crazy concept, and I'd love to see where it could go, but it does look like, based on that wording, to be concluded that issue 6 will be the end of the Vigil. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a pleasant surprise and it'll be spun off in some other way. Could it mean it's just a conclusion of this introductory story? One can hope, but I don't have much reason to. Anyway, so that's The Vigil number 5, the book that I've really been enjoying and kind of suspected, given how much I was just enraptured by it. I thought I was probably going to get canceled. That's how these things seem to go for me. Ultimately, I read Titans number 3, where the Titans are still trying to solve the mystery of Wally West's, the Flash, his murder. Even though he is there with them, of course there's time travel involved, but they've got a Wally West corpse, and they know that according to the, his corpse, the next 48 hours is when the Wally who's walking around and breathing with them is destined to die. And so they're trying to figure out what's going on with the cult of Brother Blood, which seems to be trying to put on a new face. I said an issue or two back that it's given me Scientology vibes. So anyway, but Aqualad is on board with this new Church of the Light, or Church of Not Blood, or whatever they're calling themselves. I can't remember. But at the very end of this issue, it does seem, even though I was kind of getting convinced, I was like, oh, maybe they are trying to turn over a new leaf. But then, like, at the very end, the leader of the cult of whatever it is called now said, thank you, Aqualad, or whatever, Garth is his name, for helping me with this ruse, because he was interacting with the Titans. So evidently there was some deception going on there. What part? How much? Is he full-on evil, or was just part of it a ruse and he's not really evil? I don't know. But then he opens up his mouth and weird spidery stuff comes out of it and goes into Garth. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know. That's not a super friendly look. So we'll see what happens. So I'm still very interested in where Titans is going, especially as of issue number 3. Finally, we've got Wonder Woman number 1, which very in small brackets they put Legacy number 801. So I wonder if they're going to continue that in order to continue sort of the numbering of Wonder Woman and representing, or recognizing how long she has been around, but at the same time have their cake and eat it too, going back to a number 1, letting readers know, hey, new start here, great jumping on point. This is written by Tom King, and I've enjoyed his stuff in the past, and already I can tell that I'm going to enjoy at least the next couple of issues of Wonder Woman. This one, it presents this situation in Montana where an Amazon, I'm trying to remember if she had a name, if it was, I think there's a couple of Amazons that have kind of also become superheroes in the world, or vigilantes of some kind. Anyway, but an Amazon gets into a ruckus in a bar in Montana and ends up seemingly killing all the men that were present there. And so there's this big kind of political turmoil going on right now where the United States government is afraid of what's going on with the Amazons, and can we trust them now? And so the U.S. government feels like they need to respond by helping all the Amazons get out of America. They're no longer welcome here until we figure out what's going on. And so I like that this is turning into kind of like a government conspiracy type story, and creating opportunities for like special ops teams to come and come to the homes of Amazons and say, you got to come with us. And it gets kind of that gritty kind of grounded vibe that I sometimes like in stories, and it contrasts really well with Wonder Woman's mythological ancient kind of backdrop. And honestly, I think I've realized that I tend to enjoy Wonder Woman the most when she is the fish out of water, the one that is out of place in her environment, as opposed to her going on adventures where she's flying on a Pegasus and she's going after the Cyclops and doing all these Greek things. I'm less interested in that. I'd rather her be what she is from that backdrop, from that aesthetic, but then have her juxtaposed against a modern world. I think that is going to be my preference for Wonder Woman. I think that's been my preference for her in the past most times. So already they're getting off on a pretty strong foot for me. It also looks like there's going to be the introduction of a new villain that we've never seen before. They show in some back room a man given a crown who, it seems, has in some way been manipulating specifically United States politics for a long time, and is in possession of something called the Lasso of Lies. And this is really kind of the big tease, the big reveal at the end of the issue. So we don't really know anything about this character, where he comes from, what his abilities are, what kind of threat he represents, apart from having that Lasso of Lies, what kind of threat he represents to Wonder Woman physically, if at all, or if he's just going to be a manipulator behind the scenes. But at the very least, I'm interested in this. I know it's kind of an old school comic booky idea to like have the opposite of the hero, you know. Wonder Woman has the lasso of truth, or he's got the lasso of lies. She's like this young, beautiful woman. He's this old crotchety man, you know. So I don't know, but I think I'm intrigued, at least at this point. And I think the writing style can go a long way for me. And Tom King, his writing style, at least, even if I don't connect with every story that he's written, his writing style does hit kind of that meat and potatoes vibe of writing that I tend to enjoy. Even if he's not creating stories that like represent the heights of my comic book enjoyment, I feel like a Tom King story, I'm going to engage with it, I'm going to find it solid and enjoyable, and I'm going to be interested in seeing where it goes, and yeah. So, okay, at long last, that's all I think that I have to say about comic books for now. As always, I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Remember to check out christiangeekcentral.com for tons more content. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. It is time again for Christian Geek Central's annual Game Save event, fundraising for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which provides free treatment for children facing life or death circumstances and shares its cutting-edge, life-saving research with hospitals all over the world. And once again this year, I'm drawing attention to our team's fundraising by performing a 24-hour marathon of video gaming that I will live stream on youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral beginning 6 a.m. Pacific Time on Saturday, November 4th. You can donate or get more info by clicking on my fundraising page in the links below, where you'll also find incentives and rewards for doing so. On top of that, I've set fundraising milestones that will unlock strange and unusual happenings as I reach them. Now, there are some stipulations and time limits on those rewards and milestones, so quickly follow the link below to my fundraising page for all the details. Believe it or not, this makes the 10th consecutive year of Christian Geek Central raising funds for kids in great need of medical care. I hope you'll be a part of helping me and the Christian Geek Central Game Save team do some good for some kids who really need it. And then please join me at youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral for my 24-hour marathon starting at 6 a.m. Pacific on Saturday, November 4th. Hope to see you there.